Hi folks, welcome to your notes video for the media. And this is your last set of notes for Unit 3 on linkage institutions. And today we are going to be focusing on that final linkage institution, which is the media. And as a result, your learning objectives are to explain how the media is an example of a linkage institution. How does it work to connect people to the government? Describe the various roles of the media and their impacts, and explain how increasingly diverse choices of media and communication influence political institutions and behavior. So let's start with media as a linkage institution. We've talked about linkage institutions as political parties, elections, and interest groups, and now we are on our fourth and final one. The media is known as the fourth estate, kind of like not as powerful as a branch of government, but it is definitely very powerful. It's like that fourth piece here when we're looking at our government. The media has the power to influence society and politics. We have freedom of press, which places that additional check on the government to maintain honesty, ethics, and transparency. Since our founding of this country, and even before then, reporting and commenting on the government has been common. Right. And this idea that you should be able to speak out against your government without repercussions. Right. So this idea that, the press, the media can report on what the government is doing is an additional check on the government to make sure that it is functioning properly and, with the will of the people. And of course, then this freedom of the press is enshrined in the First Amendment. First Amendment is all about freedom of expression, and that includes the media, the press. So then how is media a linkage institution? I've got a couple of things that we're going to talk about here first, and then we'll come back to this here later. But one of the things that the media does is keeps the average citizen informed and aware, right? This has changed over time, as we will talk about here in just a second. But, the purpose of media is to, expose anything that the government is doing, bring issues to people's awareness, I should say. The media also reports on citizens' concerns as well as the actions of the government, right? So people themselves, you yourself can reach out to the media to voice your concern. You have the opportunity to protest. You can write into news stations. You can take polls, and you can express your concerns. And, if that gets enough media attention, then the government might take action. It kind of shows the government what you think is important. New media technologies provide constant updates as news develops, and that is more of a recent development with this 24-hour news cycle, the internet, right? But you have constant updates to what is going on in the government. You can constantly be engaged with government actions. And then social media as well allows citizens and the government to share information, right? Love it or hate it, the Twitter of President Trump allows citizens to interact with him and him to interact with the government. And that is for all public officials, right? Many, many, many government officials have transitioned to social media as a way to, voice their opinions, talk about their accomplishments, and keep the people connected to the government itself. Now, let's talk about the history of the free press here very quickly. On your notes, there are no fill in the blanks. What I'm going to have you do is summarize. So please, please, please do not write all of this word for word. Please try to put this in your own words. But let's start at the very beginning. Big picture here is that the free press has transitioned from elite audiences to instant reporting via the internet. So back at the very beginning of our history, right, only the elite received, news, political reporting, things like that. That was just the way it was because of, circulation of news and lack of technology. But now we have instant reporting, and the audience has grown tremendously to reach almost everyone. So I would definitely make sure to get this big picture idea down. Now, traditional press, I'm talking about like colonial newspapers during and after the American Revolution. This was really early on. This is where we're going to see the most elite audience, only because, only large cities received those newspapers. They were printed weekly. It was not, the news cycle that we have today. Now, something to note here, newspapers back during this time period, it started out as a way for factions to spread their ideas, right? So we see the first newspapers created by the Federalists and Anti-Federalists after the founding of our country to spread their ideas. And what we see then happen over time is circulation of newspapers has expanded. National news organizations have come into being. And we also see the addition of the telegraph. And that is going to really bring about, worldwide news. And obviously, this is a little bit later, right, the telegraph, but that's going to bring about, connecting global events, or at least nationwide events, if not global. We also see the rise of investigative journaling starting in the progressive era. So if you've heard of Muckrakers, if you've heard like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, that is kind of the beginnings of investigative journaling. And the purpose of this was to expose corruption and bring attention to the public to necessary reforms. Basically the purpose of this, digging into the corruption of government, changing the mindset of the people to bring about those reforms, right? It's a lot easier to convince the public that legislation needs to be done when it is reported on and the public can see that. So again, we're seeing that link to the government. And as communication technologies like the telegraph advance more and more, that's going to allow for this type of news to be shared beyond respective cities and a lot faster. So we're going to see a lot of more standardized, unbiased reporting nationwide, or at least more broadly. Now, moving into more of the 20th century here, we're going to see the development of the radio and television, and we're going to see broadcast stations. And this is where broadcasting is done from one central location to smaller stations called affiliates. And we're going to also see that radio, television is going to again expand the audiences that are able to learn information about what's going on. So we see a lot of fact-based reporting as journalism as we move toward broadcast media. Now, this is definitely important to note. If you haven't written this down, I would. We do see the creation of the FCC, or the Federal Communications Commission, in 1934. And what the purpose of this commission is to regulate electronic media. And it has authority over the content of radio, TV, wire, and satellite broadcasts. And it's also going to regulate ownership by attempting to prevent monopolies of countries, or not countries, my goodness, of companies. So for example, the FCC forbade the NBC network from operating two networks. So NBC then sold one of its networks, which led to the establishment of ABC. So that's just an example there. Now, the FCC has been criticized recently with things like net neutrality, which we'll talk about later in this class, as well as, just regular censorship, especially of music. If any of you are Eminem fans, he has a line, I'm not going to rap it. Maybe in class you can convince me to, right? But he talks about how the FCC is detrimental to what he does as a rapper. But overall, the FCC is there to regulate what is broadcast over radio, TV, and satellite. We also see the rise during this time of the big three networks. So we see ABC, NBC, we just talked about that split there, and then also CBS. And those are going to be the three big networks that produce political reporting during this time. TV is going to bring about candidate-centered campaigns because in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, more and more households are getting TVs. And for the first time ever, they're able to see the candidates and how they interact. Debates are going to happen here. And what we see is a new era of campaigning emerge, one where appearances matter, right? The candidates themselves are, in a sense, closer to the people, right? People are seeing them in their homes on the TV. They become more personable. And those televised debates are going to be huge in the first years of, of the television and political reporting. JFK is going to utilize this to his advantage in the first televised debate against Nixon. During this time, we see the start of a 24-hour news cycle. So it's not just certain hours of the day. You can turn on your TV at any time and start listening to what's going on around the world. And then also narrowcasting appeals to a specific audience, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But really by 1980, we start to see that 24-hour news cycle. We start to see the rise of MSNBC as well as Fox News dominate the broadcasting world as well. And today, we have the broadest audience due to the internet. And this has led to competition to speed up publishing. And as a result, we are kind of in this fake news world that we live in right now, where we have a lot of bias. We have an increase in sensationalism in terms of headlines, right? What is going to generate clicks? What's going to drive the consumer to click on various, articles, and what's going to bring in the most profit. So that's kind of been a consequence of the internet. All right, let's go back to media as a linkage institution, because I do want to talk about how this political reporting, especially what we see today, informs and influences political participation and policy. So political reporting, when I'm talking about political reporting, I'm talking about just the facts reporting, trying to be as unbiased as possible. We have seen a shift away from this in recent years, but that is still around and still the goal of many organizations. Government officials will use political reporting to make announcements, paint themselves and the government in a positive light. So overall, I think one of the big things with political reporting is transparency. This idea that the government should be honest, should be ethical, and the people should be able to know. So as a result, in the 70s, we see C-SPAN developed, which is a public organization, and that televises proceedings of the federal government. So you can watch House and Senate debates. It'll broadcast, various things done by the federal government. And then also press conferences that are held by, the executive branch and others as well, just to inform the public and let the media ask questions to maintain that transparency. In this era of news, we also have political analysis and political commentary. So political analysis is going to also work to inform the citizenry, looking at topics in depth, and usually they have experts on that particular subject to educate the public. So in 2014, there was an issue with campaign finance. And a lot of channels and organizations use this time period to bring on experts to talk about the rulings of Buckley versus Valeo and Citizens United versus the FEC, which we talked about last section of the unit. Right, so it was a way for them to educate the public on those pretty complex Supreme Court cases. Excuse me. And then you also have political commentary, which has risen exponentially throughout the years. And this is where, we have editorials, op-eds, those opinionated pieces that reveal a publication's view. And you have commentators on CNN, on Fox News that come on, and their job is to literally talk about their opinions on what's going on in politics, what's going on in the government. And it has become kind of challenging for people, for the average citizen, to identify, what's opinion versus what is fact, for various reasons that we'll look at here in a bit. Now, the media has three roles. And the first is that of scorekeeper. And here, the media's job is to update readers and viewers on the ups and downs of competing candidates. Really, what this has done and led to is the media overly discusses who is leading, who is falling behind. So this is that horse race journalism that we talked about when we talked about polling as well. And what happens as a result then is they overemphasize public opinion polls. and they will ignore or underreport policies and legislation, right? A candidate's platform, their legislation, their biography, that remains static. That doesn't change. Poll data changes. And as a result, that is what is newsworthy. And that is what the news is going to report on. And what happens is we have this continuous cycle of scorekeeping of who's up, who's down, who's popular, who's not. It kind of becomes a popularity contest rather than focusing on qualifications of candidates and, people in the position and their platforms. And this lasts beyond the election as well, as they are in office, looking at their successes and failures, as their approval rating goes up and down as well. The second role is the gatekeeper. So what that means is the media sets their own news agenda. They determine what is newsworthy, what information the public will receive, right? You can think of it like the media decides what goes beyond the gate and what does not, right? So what is presented to the public and how much coverage it receives determines the issues that people will find important. So an example of this would be the Me Too movement. If you haven't heard of the Me Too movement, it was about exposing and stopping sexual aggression and sexual assault in the workplace. By talking about these stories and having people on and covering, this issue that was brought to the public's attention, they ultimately, indirectly facilitated an organized effort to prevent this from happening. And if you guys remember hearing anything about a guy named Harvey Weinstein, he was kind of the one that started all of this. Many, many women came out to, expose him of sexual assault. And that is what kind of led to this Me Too movement, which has continued on into this day. As the gatekeeper, the media also encourages citizens to contact their members of Congress. They'll write letters and assemble in support of a cause, right? They're the ones deciding what we are fed, so to speak, if you're looking at this cartoon, right? So what should the people, the citizens, talk about to their representatives? And then we finally have the watchdog. The watchdog role of the media is reporting that is done to keep an eye on the government, look for corruption, expose any scandals that are happening, and look for inefficiency. So it's kind of, this is really that check on the government itself. And this is going to be strengthened during and after Vietnam. I feel like we always come back to this. But the reason why here is Vietnam was a controversial conflict. Journalists began to question information that was provided by, U.S. military members and also diplomats. Another reason here, along with the rise of television, citizens are going to see the realities of war on their TV screens, and that is going to help inspire mass protests that we see come up against the war. And then after Vietnam, we see reporters uncovering Watergate and the burglary scandal, where, you have these members stealing information to help Nixon's reelection campaign. And that was really alarming to the public as the media was reporting on it. So it was exposing that scandal, making sure that the government is kind of kept, under close watch. And this role has solidified what has become an adversarial press. This is kind of the negative relationship between the government and the free press. Reporters continuously question government officials, their motives, their effectiveness, right? It's an adversarial or a combative relationship oftentimes because, not everything needs to be looked at with scrutiny, right? But that seems to be what the media does quite often. Now, moving into the end of this set of notes here, guys, we do need to talk about bias and media ownership. So one of the major trends that we are seeing in the media is that the more media choices we have, that is increasing. And we also have more control over what information we want to seek. And I think it's important to say, there is no doubt that there is bias in the media. News outlets are, divided along liberal and conservative lines. It's just a matter of where is the bias and to what side does it lean. So, like I just said, these media choices are becoming more partisan and more ideologically based as they vie for readers and consumers, right? Because again, remember, the goal is to kind of make a profit here. They want more readers, and what people are reading is if things are more ideological, more partisan. Even Fox, CNN, MSNBC have revealed their bias in search of profits. And this is after the Fairness Doctrine was lifted. So the Fairness Doctrine was a former law that required broadcasters to present alternative viewpoints. That has been lifted. So, those news stations don't have to offer those alternative viewpoints anymore. So that has kind of opened the door for a little bit more bias in reporting. The growth of media outlets has also begun with a specific agenda and a targeted audience, narrowcasting. And again, those media outlets have a specific agenda. They're trying to reach that targeted audience. So as a result, they are more ideologically based programs as well. And trend-wise, it's not just about the news anymore, right? When you first had a TV back in the day, you had news stations. Now it's options for entertainment, sports. It's very wide in terms of what is offered. And that has led to a gap in political knowledge and participation because people, don't just turn on their TV for news anymore. Many choose to skip that because they don't want to watch it. They want the entertainment piece. So we've kind of lost some of that educational value when it comes to, especially the TV as a media outlet. And then we also need to talk about the confirmation bias. So because we have all of this ideological programming, media outlets are narrowcasting for specific targeted audiences. We tend to see this confirmation bias, and that is the tendency for people to seek out and interpret information that will confirm what they already believe. And as a result, there's no incentive to consider opposing viewpoints. And what this does is creates echo chambers that reinforce existing beliefs. So if you think about social media has a lot of echo chambers, right? Groups of friends share similar articles that reinforce beliefs that they already have. And they're not going to go outside and look at opposing viewpoints. So it kind of creates this reinforcing of beliefs to confirm, so to speak, what they already think is true. And as a result, then, I should add as well, they're going to keep going back to that more ideological programming as well. And then finally here, we need to talk about consumer-driven media. Media is the gatekeeper. We talked about that a couple slides ago. And increasingly, their role as the gatekeeper is not about, providing political information. It is content that they provide will be influenced by actions and the needs of consumers. So it's not about what they think the people need to know. It's what do they want the people to know that will earn the most money, because profit drives action, right? Their idea is, what will generate clicks, what will generate views. So like you see clickbait arising, right? Or outlets like BuzzFeed, right? Those things are definitely consumer-driven media. That's what's popular. That's what's going to produce money for the organizations. And I did want to post this handy chart here. What this does is kind of show you the bias of organizations, news outlets, and whether they lean left or right. So obviously neutral is best. Things like Associated Press, the USA Today, all of these here in the middle. And then you can kind of see where maybe some of the things that you look at, maybe where that falls as well. So I will post this to Classroom. You don't have to do anything with this today, but I will post this for your reference. Alrighty, folks, your goals today were to explain the role of the media as a linkage institution. How does it connect the people to the government? Describe the various roles of the media and how it impacts the people and the information they receive. And explain how increasingly diverse choices of media and communication outlets influence political institutions and political behavior. So you should be able to answer these 3 questions now that you have watched this video. So make sure to reach out if you have any questions, and I will talk to you in class. See ya.